to assist them, basically take them by their hand and do step by step by the application process. And a lot of this stuff is usually hard for somebody who has never been incarcerated, maneuvering everything online. So we help them completing their financial application for financial. We also identify a lot of resources that are available to them that are not normally available to just any other student. Like one of them we found is very helpful. It's called the Department of Rehabilitation, which that has helped me since I've been starting school. And I think I've had it for 6 years. Now they're paying for my master's. They're trying to get me ahead, and they pay for your books. They pay for financial aid. If you don't have the money, they'll pay for a pair of glasses if you need glasses. They get you computers, printers, things, anything to do with your education. And they help people if they need interview for their clothes. They help you prepare for interviews. So that's one of the great resources that I found. And there's usually just the other ones that are on campus, like the EOPS or Disabled Student Services. And I found to use every resource that was available to me. And we create a file for them so we can monitor them, how they're doing in their education. And we keep an eye on that, and then we do a progress report for them. And then we share tips, like the tips that we use, like go to your professor, sit in the front rows. These are things it's important to do as a student, not just from incarcerated, but just as a student. And the one-on-one mentoring, it makes them feel connected, like they have somebody they could talk to who's been through it. And us is how far we are in our education, shows them, we're the example. You can be who we are. And I think that helps a lot because they see it, that it works.
And so part of outreach, another thing that we do is that we attend a number of conferences to enhance our professional development. And it also places us in a forum that allows us to network, and it also helps us boost our public speaking skills.
In addition, it helps us rewrite our narrative and kind of start viewing it a little bit more positively and starting to kind of get rid of some of that stigma that's attached to being formerly incarcerated. So we kind of start claiming our story and start feeling proud of some of the stuff that we've been able to overcome and some of the stuff we've been able to accomplish. And with that, we're able, by participating on panels, we're able to help the other formerly incarcerated students that are in the audience that may, this is their first time coming to a conference, maybe they're just starting out in higher education, and, without having an example, they may just go through their college experience just kind of being quiet about their incarceration history. And then in addition, like she said, networking, not only are we examples to formerly incarcerated students that are just beginning their academic journey, we were able to network with formerly incarcerated college graduates and professionals in our field. Like I've met one licensed clinical social worker, and now I know she was able to get licensing, I can do it too. So it just kind of makes us that much more passionate and sure about the stuff that we can accomplish as far as licensing, professions, and stuff like this.
Also part of the networking is we've also found students just all around California that we connect. We have each other's phone numbers from it, and it's not just, it's from the farthest north of California to the lowest of Southern California. We call each other family. Hey, family, how are you doing? And we reach out that way. And with us, one of the pictures is on top. There's 5 women up there who represent the 5 Cal states in LA County, where there's one from each of us, and we go on panels with each other, and we are connected like sisters. And we've been to several panels. We went to Dallas, went to Atlanta, and went to Florida, and we've been to New York twice. And now we're here representing for us here, and hope to do more. And what I find with this connection, when we have, if somebody's having something on their campus, they reach out to us and we all support them. We'll all go and support and give our info, whatever we need. And that also brings more help with the networking for the new people who are coming in. And that's where we go reach out to the organizations like Anti-Recidivism Coalition and Homeboy Industries, and we pull them into our networking. And I think that is also a great way of networking. Our achievements. Like she said, faculty support is very important. Like I said, Professor Banal was my first person I met on campus, but I have also a unique story with another professor who happens to be a DA for the city of Long Beach. While I was sitting in her class, I ended up finding out she was a DA who spent 2 years in prison. She happened to be the professor in the class that I was in. And that is a very unique story. So we did an event. It was called My Sister's Keeper. And she was there to share her story. That's what made it the unique part. But not just that, just last month she became a judge. And my story was in the newspaper. And just so happened the governor who had her appointment with her for her interview happened to see the story the day it came out. It was the same day she had her appointment. She made it judge. I got to go to her enrollment. And that is one of the best things I have for my story with the networking with faculty. My second is the university support. They will, I've gotten scholarships. I've been on the dean's list. I've been, which has allowed me to be keynote speaker in a lot of events. And with the support of our president of Cal State Long Beach, it has helped me open up doors like I've never thought would ever open for me. The family support, I'm building back the relationships that I lost with my children. They're my adult children when I was out in my addiction. I burned a lot of bridges. I did a lot of wrong. I was homeless, them having to see me at my lowest. But now they're there for me now, watching me as I'm going higher up in education. And that has made me so proud. And they're proud of me also.
Okay. So how has Rising Scholars contributed to my success? It has done so in many ways. First off, being the inclusivity of the program, then letting me join as a member, even though I was from a different Cal State university, was like so important to me, and I'm so grateful for that. I was my senior year in college when our college got picked to implement Project Rebound into our state university system, which is the program to support formerly incarcerated students. So I was able to draw off a lot of what they're doing on their campus as far as how are they holding events, how are they creating flyers, how did they get their student group going with their bylaws and all these different things. And I used that to help implement the program at my college. So it was great to kind of, instead of having to reinvent the wheel, was just kind of able to go off a lot of stuff that they already had in place and we're figuring out as well. And then also just being able to team up with them for a lot of the outreach that they're doing in the community. Irene and I go to, like we said, a lot of outreach events in the community. So just being able to have, like, not have to go there by myself and having another person to be able to go there with was so important. And through all their networking, you know, was being able to connect with other people on other campuses as well.
So when I transferred to Cal State Long Beach, I was already in my early 30s, and I was extremely lost. I had just experienced 2 deaths of very close relatives, and I would sit and cry in between classes. I was not in a good place. And then I met Dr. Banal, and he introduced me to Irene and Rising Scholars, and they've just opened up doors for me. They've given me opportunities to come to conferences, to speak, to go to events, and I'm just grateful to be able to call Rising Scholars my family. I really am. They are the reason why I'm here and I'm alive and well.
Because of the support of Rising Scholars, I finally feel like I have value in society. I found my calling, basically. I found the purpose of what I can do with my education. And now with my master's, I'm going to be able to work in community colleges, build programs, build organizations to also help those coming into the education. And because of Rising Scholars, I learned what integrity meant. I never knew what integrity meant until I became part of something. And I think that is very important. And when I was in prison, I suffered a stroke and almost didn't make it. Suffered a heart attack because of the damage from the drugs. And now that I'm where I'm at now, my kids got to come to my graduation. They didn't end up having to come bury me at my funeral. That's what would have happened if I would have stayed in my addiction. And Rising Scholars is going to continue to keep me doing what I'm doing and helping those who need the help. And I just want to say thank you, guys. If you guys have any questions, we're open up for questions. Okay, okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are so excited to be here to tell you a little bit about the work we do in Northern Colorado with our Community Literacy Center and the Speak Out Writing Program. So I'm going to talk just for a couple of minutes to give you a little bit of framework, and then we'll turn it over to the three folks who have been facilitators for at least 2 semesters each, so they can make some observations about their experiences and what they've noticed happening for writers. So Speak Out started in 2005, so we're about, if we do the math there, quite a few years in. We started working with Community Corrections, our halfway house, with a women's group, and as you can see, we've grown to 7 different sites that range from youth rehabilitation centers to groups that happen inside the jail. We've also started just this semester working with our local parole officers, and so we have a women's group that's meeting for folks who are on parole. And we're also in contact with some folks in Sterling to see if we can get a site going there as well with the halfway house and potentially inside the jail as well. So Speak Out, I was thinking this morning as Aaron Castro was talking about what it means to fit into higher education in prison. And really what we represent doesn't fit. It doesn't meet those requirements. We don't have an admissions process. We are open access, and we are an arts-based education program. We vacillate. Our program gets support from family foundations, primarily grant funding almost exclusively to publish the book that you have at the table in front of you. So I invite all of you to please take those with you, pass them on, take them to your programs. There's nothing our writers like more than knowing that their work is traveling around the country or around the world. And so the work that's inside the book, which comes out twice a year, represents writers ranging from those youth participants to folks who are in jail. We try to make sure everyone who wants to be represented has a space inside the journal. The artwork on the front is also generated by someone at one of our sites. You can also see from this slide that we have program philosophies, and we're driven by principles as opposed to a curriculum. So every one of the groups looks a little bit different every single semester that we run it. Those principles are informed by feminist theory, by narrative methods, by critical literacy practices, and we really think of this work as activist in nature. This is literacy activism. And part of the way that we see that activism being deployed is through the dissemination of the journal. So we want things to happen for individual writers who are confined, but we also really want a chance for them to put their words out into the world in whatever form they think is right for them at the moment. The staffing of our weekly workshops, which are about 90 minutes each, takes the form of usually 3 or 4 interns or community members or volunteers that come from campus. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. We've also put a handout on your table for future information. It includes one of the fact sheets that we hand out, which outlines those general principles. It includes some guidelines that have been collaboratively developed over the years, as well as some excerpts from voices that we don't have time to highlight today, but we thought you might be interested. Whenever we talk about this kind of work, we want to make sure we share the stage. And so we're going to take just a minute or so to let you hear from some of our writers. And these are poems that came from some of our Speak Out youth groups.
I am the first sip of coffee, cozy and soothing, comforting me like a parent, bringing me happiness no matter what time of day.
I am those nights after a long day of tears like rain, if only it was drizzle, but it was a hurricane.
I am from no love, cold hearts, and death that brings out a side of you that will put you in a cell with white walls. Again, my name is Shelby Tuthill, and I'm one of the interns at the Community Literacy Center. So far in my time with Speak Out, I've had the chance to work both with women in the jail, as well as with a men's group at the Community Corrections Facility. And so I'm going to start off by sharing some of my insights from the work that we do. There's a power dynamic inherent in being people from the outside that come to work with folks on the inside. Our program is nested in a community literacy center that's associated with the university. And so many of the volunteers do come from the privilege and from the socialization of formal higher education and of being in the world. Plus, many of us have never experienced incarceration, nor have we experienced the after effects of re-entering the general public with a criminal record. So we come in with a level of structural privilege that in some ways places us higher than the writers that we work with. And there are many ways that we can make intentional choices that either reinforce that power dynamic in harmful ways or work in small ways to start flattening that dynamic. In Speak Out, we use a combination of intentional practices and linguistic decisions to help level out this power differential. And I'll share some of them here. The first thing I'll touch on is how we choose to talk about ourselves and the work that we do with Speak Out. A lot of writers consider our program a class. They refer to us as teachers, and a lot of them may carry unconscious ideas of the facilitators as grading or evaluating them. It may activate really negative memories of these writers' early experiences in formal education settings. And so in an attempt to temper this, we refer to Speak Out as a writing workshop and to ourselves as facilitators. We avoid classroom-type terms like grades, assignments or homework, teachers, class, and lessons. Whether in the workshop itself or outside of it, we call the writers what they are, writers, whereas the facilities in which we work more readily call them inmates. When we call them writers, we allow them to inhabit an identity that is much broader, much more expansive, a lot more positive than just their confinement. One of the few rules we have at Speak Out is that you respect your own work. And this is one that really sticks with the writers. Someone in workshop slips up and prefaces their work with, "It's not very good." I find that other writers will always come in with a chorus of, "Don't diss your own work." And that can mean so much when it comes from us, but also from the other writers. It reminds them, I think, that their purpose in the group is so much greater than producing just good writing. There are also practices that we use that place us as facilitators onto a level that's a bit closer than with the writers. I'll list them here and I'll let you all reflect on how these practices might help to make our program more accessible and make that power differential just a bit smaller. One is to keep our focus away from grammar and to give feedback that's encouraging and focus more on content and emotion than on things like spelling and capitalization. This has a similar purpose to avoiding classroom terminology. There's one quote from a Speak Out participant that I have here that I think sums up some of the things that we hope to accomplish that go beyond the dynamics of a traditional classroom. This writer says, "I believe Speak Out is one of the best programs we have here, in that it allows us to express ourselves. It also encourages us to express ourselves without fear of getting in trouble or being belittled for our feelings." Another practice that we use is to write with the writers. When we give prompts during our workshops, we write alongside them, and we share our work alongside them and receive feedback from the writers as well. Lastly, we bring in material that's accessible and relatable, and hope to bring in stuff that's not so academic that it becomes difficult to access, difficult to read, difficult to process. Writers come in with a variety of reading levels and English language proficiency, and we really hope to cater to the variety of ability levels and experiences represented in the workshops. And as facilitators, we can also ask the writers for preferences and recommendations, letting them have just a bit more agency over the content of the workshop. And so now I'll pass it along to Haven, who will talk a bit about the value of relationships in workshop.
I'm Haven. Like Shelby, I'm an intern at the Community Literacy Center, and I've had the opportunity to work with women for a year and with men for a year. That's what I'm doing right now. So what I've noticed is that the prison industrial complex falls short in many ways, and I think that the main one is the isolation and the alienation that it creates. Correctional facilities strip incarcerated people of their ability to socialize. It dictates who they can talk to, what they can say, and when they can say it. This practice is subtle but ever present. In the Larimer County Jail, for example, where we work, it manifests as guards who ignore people outright or who punish them for speaking out of turn, which itself is subjective and not clearly defined. Socialization is a critical way to reduce recidivism, as you guys touched on over there. But jail discourages social interaction and expects the incarcerated to transition into society seamlessly after they're released. The question I often ask myself is, how can we expect the formerly incarcerated to become members of the outside community when they've been trained to keep to themselves? I think that's the question that's really at the core of prison education, and I'm sure it's one that maybe you have grappled with yourself. And this is a gap the Speak Out workshop really tries to bridge. The power of Speak Out is not only in the healing writing it produces, but in the relationships that it creates. Speak Out workshops provide a safe place for the incarcerated to do just that, speak out. For an hour and a half each week, those who are constantly told to stay quiet and keep to themselves are given the opportunity to interact freely with one another. They can share stories, tell jokes, and work through their trauma together. Some writers are very open, others are more reserved, but what they all share is a sense of camaraderie that they really believe in. Over time, the writers become increasingly comfortable with one another and give support freely. The conversations we have in workshop are often very heavy. They usually center around violence, abuse, addiction, sexual abuse, and even homelessness. The writers know, though, that when they bring these things up, they do so for an audience who is receptive and understanding more than people on the outside. The more the writers share, the more they realize they have in common. They understand that they're not alone and that each person in the room, even if their experiences aren't identical, can empathize with what they're saying and share in their pain in one way or another. This shared vulnerability fosters a community built on trust and acceptance. Instead of feeling embarrassed or exposed, writers find great comfort in sharing their hardships with their peers. Together, they confront their issues and can work through their demons. The relationship formed between the incarcerated people in our workshops continue to grow on their own. Workshop participants, in my experience, keep the spirit of Speak Out alive when they're not there, swapping poems in their free time, or discussing prompts that we've given in class. The conversations we have in our sessions are only the beginning. The expansion of the relationship between participants is quickly evident. More often than not, when a writer will elect to share their piece, someone else will chime in and say, "Oh, I'm so excited that you're reading this. It's so great." Or, "I remember this. You showed it to me last week. I'm really glad that you're bringing it up." Friendships formed in a creative writing workshop might not seem significant, but they have a far-reaching impact that carries on outside of the sessions. The culture of shame created by our penal system doesn't encourage the incarcerated to seek help. Instead of sharing their trauma or working through it, those in jail are made to feel that they must repress it and fall in line. Incarcerated individuals can't overcome their problems unless they are given the opportunity to talk through them. They can't rise above their circumstances alone, nor should they be expected to. Those in jail benefit from a support network as much as any of us would. Many of them, for one reason or another, can't rely on the support of their friends or the support of their family the way you and I could. They can, though, rely on the support of their fellow writers. I had one writer tell me that he had been disowned by his family, and it was nice to feel that for once, people finally cared about him. He said it was a feeling he hadn't had in a long time, and something he didn't really realize was missing until he had it again. That's how big that void had been for him. Unfortunately, it's challenging to keep contact with people after they leave workshop, so I can't really speak how those relationships manifest outside of the walls. But I can say that at the very least, when they leave, they know that there's a group of people inside who are supportive, who care about them, who respect their ideas, and have their best interests at heart. We've all touched on it a little bit here, but empathy is really the cornerstone of our practice. So I'll hand it over to Manton, who can talk a little bit more about the challenges of empathy and the role that plays in our workshops.
Hi, I'm Manton. I'm an intern in the Larimer County Jail as well with Haven, with the men's population. So like she has brought up, there's a great ability for the inmates to be able to empathize with one another. And I'm gonna touch a little bit on what it means as a facilitator to bring in empathy. So we have all this shared experience, stubbing our toe, and you know, I can empathize with you, you can empathize with me, but and in the writing workshop, the writers can empathize with one another more so than I could. And so over the past 2 semesters, as I've worked with the men in the Larimer County Jail, I began to find myself amongst a group of individuals that I didn't always have a shared experience with. As a facilitator, I wondered how I might empathize with a person who has a totally different life experience, especially in a place I'm new to, a place with a social pool of biases and stereotypes. I'm gonna go transition to a story here that kind of, I think, will highlight the complexity of this topic. So last semester, we were in one of our final workshops at the jail. Everyone was really light and bright because we brought in the proof copy to get their final edits before publishing the final copy that you all have on the table. One man, a little younger than me, kept smiling and commenting on how special it was to see his and the other guys' work printed in the book. I began to see the power of the journal as it moved from hand to hand. During that workshop, a lot of the writers practiced reciting their work for the upcoming reading the following week, which we would try to bring in as many people, public voices as we can, so that they can witness them reading their work. Another guy by the name pen name Spider Loco was about to read his poem, but first he told us how hesitant he was to share a story because it involved addiction, dealing, and violence. He didn't want to be seen as a criminal talking about guns like the one tattooed on his hand. But it took him a few weeks to write the poem. He rarely shared anything in workshop. He was really hesitant. But he told us the story was important to him, and it really was nagging at him to share it in the space. And I'll share a little segment right now. First day at school in Big Brother's old shoes, and I'm in his footsteps with homemade tattoos. He'll be gone in 3 summers at most, or at least he'll come home a gangster, a straight fucking beast. On parole for 3 more, he does what he can to maintain for the moment almost a man. But with no one to show him what that looks like, he'll pick up a sack and a Glock or a pipe. Like always, everyone snapped the fingers and gave the guy his feedback. One of the key principles that we kind of bring in, the guidelines. Before moving to the next writer, I had told Spider that I really enjoyed how he prefaced this story before reading it. And I said, you know, as a veteran, I often do not like to make my war stories public because I'm afraid that I'll become compartmentalized into only a veteran. Like Spider and most of us, I didn't want to be stereotyped. But later on that night, I'm sitting on my couch and I'm going through the journal again, and I'm trying to make the corrections to the journal that they provided to me. And I saw Spider's piece there again, and I realized I was guilty of his concern. Weeks ago, I had read his poem before sending it to publish. I had read The Glock and the Pipe, and associated with Spider, the guy with the gun tattoo. Why write about that stuff? I thought. I labeled him as a typical criminal. There on my couch, I felt shameful and that I had empathized with him over our shared concern of stereotype. I was guilty. I tell this story to highlight how internally complicated it can be to facilitate and create safe and vulnerable spaces. I learned that to do this work, I would have to continuously check my own biases. As a Speak Out facilitator and English major, I'm trained and educated in checking biases and being non-judgmental of creative expression, yet those judgments still continuously sneak in. Here are a few strategies I've learned to mitigate biases and foster empathy with those of a different life experience. 1, sit with the speaker or author as they share their experience. It is important to be present with their story, whether they are speaking or you are reading it. Here, being mindful is key. Another useful strategy is embracing the silence after the writer shares something heavy. Allow the emotion to sink in. Resist need to fill the silence with words. Finally, sometimes we all just want to be heard, which is why these safe creative spaces are so important. Back to Tobi now.
So we're trying to be mindful of time for discussion. And so we've synthesized these observations from Haven and Manton and Shelby into 3 questions that we thought we'd just leave up for discussion as we talk across our programs. And those are, in what ways are we maintaining a harmful power differential between ourselves and the confined people with whom we work? How can we encounter incarcerated how can facilitators foster meaningful relationships without overstepping institutional boundaries? And what does empathy look like within prison arts/education programs for the facilitators or teachers who are a part of them? So we thought we'd open it up to questions now.
Yeah, so any questions, comments, discussion?
Thank you. I liked how you emphasized how important language is when addressing what you do and the people you work with. I'd like to share a quick story about what I experienced with our public relations and press office at the university, because we did this tiny little seminar for the first time last semester in my university, and it turned out to be very interesting for the press and everybody. So we tried to put together a press release and we wrote it ourselves. Then comes the press office and they know everything better. So it was very important for us to talk about, we had a seminar with incarcerated students and our students from the outside. And it was very important to us to talk about incarcerated students and not studying prisoners or prisoners who study. So the press office totally turned around the whole language. So they wouldn't use the word prison because that sounds really dirty and bad for the academic middle class. So would rather talk about detention, which is wrong as a legal term in this situation. And they would also talk about studying prisoners instead of incarcerated students. So we would really negotiate with them about the words. Then we finally have this press release, and then they put it into the larger conference of the Public Relations Office. And the Public Relations Office finds this so interesting that the head of the Public Relations Office honors us with reworking this whole press release herself. And she changes it all back because she knows better than us who we are working with. Prisoners who study and not incarcerated students. And that was the moment where I had this major email outburst. I think she's never going to talk with me again. But it was so difficult to get that. And that's a university where we talk a lot about identity and how to address ourselves and gender mainstreaming and language and all this kind of stuff. But the moment you have someone who is not a member of the university, that does not apply anymore. So thank you for making that clear that you're mindful of that.
Hi, I'm just curious about the structure of the program. Like how many sessions does the does your organization, provide in the system? Like, is it 8 to 10? I mean, how do you get folks to start writing, and then how do you promote the program within?
Sure. How many weeks? Like 12. Yeah, so the program in each site runs for about 12 weeks. We are in some ways confined to the semester system because it does operate within CSU. And so like we take a break during the week of spring break, for example. But these are programs that are pretty well known in a lot of the facilities, particularly in the jail. And so getting attendance and that sort of thing can be actually fairly easy because there's sort of this word of mouth. Everyone gets a blue folder that has our Speak Out sticker on it, and that's what we consider kind of take it in. So if they've done it before, those people are more likely to come back in, especially in places like the jail where there are fewer spots. I work at community corrections, and it's something where we go in at the beginning of each night and we ask them to make an announcement, and they call over to the work release program, they call over to community corrections, and we give folks a couple of minutes to show up. And it sort of depends on the day. If we get a bunch of people who return and continue week to week, like throughout the 12 weeks, and there are some people who come once and don't come back because of, part of it is the nature of turnover, part of it is, especially at community corrections, a lot of people do have jobs in the community, so it really depends on what their work schedule is like and how their work schedule changes, or if it overlaps with other programming at the facility. But that's how the workshops themselves get established. Anything else to add?
We do sometimes offer special sessions. So for example, when summer comes around, much of our volunteer force is gone or has jobs themselves, but we often have a couple of 4-week sessions. The jail, I'm sure, as is the case in many of your facilities, there are special staff that are asked to stay. Our programs are all run during the evening, and so those folks are also asked to be there. And so they often don't want us to be year-round as well, because they ask for the time off in the summer or in between.
So I was just curious, I know it's hard enough in a normal college classroom to sometimes figure out in creative writing classes the line to navigate between being part of the discussion and being the leader of the discussion. And so I was curious how that works out, especially when you're talking about power dynamics, how it works best, because you're there in a sense as a leader or a facilitator, but how exactly you work out that so it's not too much leading, but it's also not too much fading into the background.
That's a good question, and that's something that we grapple with a lot. I would say that one of the main things that I do, and I know Shelby and Manton do this as well, is that if we have people who have been in Speak Out before, we often defer to them to explain what we're doing in the program, to answer questions about prompts if they aren't clear. So we really try to disseminate the power amongst people who are in the group. So it's not just us talking the whole time, it's not just our volunteers talking the whole time. And it's also just in how we occupy the physical space. I don't know, Shelby, how it is in community corrections, but in the jail, it's in a small classroom. We have 4 tables that are arranged in a square. And so it's just a simple thing, but we make a point to have each team member spread out, so it's not a panel, so to speak, of facilitators all in a row like we have right here. There will be someone on the left corner, someone in the right, so that we really become part of the group instead of just sitting there and talking with everybody. Does that answer your question?
Another thing that I would add too is one of the practices that I've noticed works pretty well is using the first couple of sessions or the first couple prompts or writing pieces that we hear read in session as a way to model what the session might look like, and other people sort of pick that up so that we don't have to be the ones prompting for it every time. And what I mean by that is along the lines of when someone finishes sharing a piece that they've just written, I might say something like, what did people like about that piece?
and that gets the conversation going. But I've noticed that a lot of the writers in the group are really eager to get that feedback, and so maybe the next time someone reads a piece, I don't have to say that, they'll just jump in immediately, or someone else in the workshop, a writer in the group, will say, what do people think? What do people like about it? Like, they'll really take to that, and that's one of the ways that I think leadership kind of gets spread out in that way.
Also add that sharing our work, like by, we bring in prompts, and I am absolutely terrible at prompted writing. So, reading it aloud, showing them that I am not an expert here. I'm just a writer. You're a writer, and this is just what we're doing here. And I think that definitely power bar a little bit.
I just want to add really quickly on the subject of prompts. Something that I have found in my workshops that works really well is having the writers create their own prompts. So oftentimes at the end of the session, I will have people in my group come up with some sort of exercise that we want to touch on. And if they would like to share that exercise, they will then be the ones who are leading it and who facilitate the discussion afterwards, who ask people to share. So we really want people to be in charge of the direction of the program, not just part of it.
I have a question for Irene. First of all, congratulations. Seeing that photo that you showed, that was all those people, that was a great photo. I was impressed. When you were the co-founder of Rising Scholars, you didn't say much about the pushback you might have had in forming this group. And was there pushback? Were there obstacles? How did you overcome them?
Since I got to the Cal State Long Beach, I have not had no pushbacks. And that's what is amazing on our campus. Everything's been moving forward ever since we started. Our events opened up doors. Our first event had 500 people. And we had to shut down the doors because we couldn't fit no more in the room. And a lot of people are curious. So they get involved. That's the main reason they come to our events, because it's something unheard of. But most of my professors, not just all of them that I've encountered, know who I am, know about my organization, know that I've been formerly incarcerated, because I'm open with them, and they're my biggest supporters. They will actually, the professors will give extra credit for the students to come to our events because they want to be there to see our event. And I think that helps too. They're just supportive. And with one another, we're family. I've been so close to that Professor Bernal. He's like one of my best friends. I talk to him daily, and he was supposed to be here, but he had to go do another event for Rising Scholars, an education lab that we're having. It's a big job fair. And he says, he goes, I'm pushing you guys out. You guys can handle this. This is your turn. This is what we're doing. You guys, we're doing two different things at the same day, and we be at two places at once. And he goes, like, you guys can handle this on your own. So him giving us that support and having the faith that we're doing this. But he wants to know, as soon as we're done, how did it go? So I have to call him right when I get done. But everything's been moving forward since.
Hi, I guess as someone who hasn't been formally incarcerated, what's the best way to start this dialogue on different campuses or within different administrations or student organizations to bring this to campus? Is that bringing like a panel of women like you to campus to openly talk about this, or what would your suggestions be?
It's not just us women, which fortunately that we do a lot of stuff together. But us being the example of how we're doing and being out there and showing the events that we do, we bring a lot of publicity. Our stories are unique. Every one of us have our own unique stories. Like mine, I've been published in the front pages of papers because of where I was and who I am now. And most of our stories, we all have a story similar to the stuff that we've overcome. And that's what makes the awareness there. And then once the awareness goes, and then that's when people start asking, how did you do it on your campus? How can we do it on our campus? Well, fortunately with the California, we already have, we're connected. It's like she said, we're not rebuilding the wheel. It's there. We just, I think the communication is also there. It helps. If something's not going right, how did you get it done on your campus? And we're very open. And go ahead, Sara, you have more to add?
Yeah, I'll add. So like an event would be a great way to just start getting the word out, and then maybe like at the end of the event or talking points in the event with saying that, we would like to start the student group on campus. Most student groups, well, for ours, you need 3 students to start it. So letting that be known as well. And then also maybe not limiting it to formerly incarcerated students, because it takes a while, for one, we don't want to speak out about our incarceration. So maybe opening up to like system impacted, and also just allies, those that are just interested in getting involved in this movement, and making that be known at the event as well. And I'm sure you would be able to, gather the 3 or 5 people or whatever is needed to start the student organization on your campus. And from there, it may take a couple years to build up. You started with 5, maybe the next year you have 8, then you're 12. Now you guys are actually turning into something.
My question actually kind of piggybacks off that. Are you aware of other programs in the U.S. that are similar to yours? And then also, I'm wondering about the role of the alumni, of the students after they graduate, what kind of interaction they have with the group.
We've already had a few that have already graduated. In fact, another one of the co-founders is graduating this year. I'm moving up to president. He's our president. But we've had a few of them, but they still come to our meetings. We're still fairly new on our campus, so they're officially alumni, but they still participate in it and everything that we do, even the paneling, or we'll have with their suggestions, because they're still part of us, and they help bring our organization to where it's at. And like I said, we're close knit, and they want to be part of it. Just because you graduate doesn't mean you have to go and leave us. But hopefully it continues that way. Like I said, we're fairly new. And our first person who graduated was in May that has left Rising Scholars. But we're already seeing that there's going to be like a whole new group. So we're already bringing in the new group that's coming in. And that's all because of our events and networking and bringing everybody. And no, we're just like Anais here, she's not even formerly incarcerated, but she's her major's criminal justice. And we get the departments involved also, not just the formerly incarcerated students. We have faculty advisors from different departments who spread the word. And I think that's also very important on our campus.
Are you aware of other programs like
that? In California, mainly. In New York, Beyond the Bars. And we also have like their sisters, it's called Beyond the Bars, but it's a chapter in California. That's how we got to know the ones in New York. I think there's one in Indianapolis and Dallas. I don't know their names though.
I wonder if the states of incarceration, does anyone know more about that project? I remember hearing a little bit about it at the National Higher Ed Prison Conference, and they seem like they might be a good collaborator. I don't know if anyone knows about that one. So that would be a good one. It's called States of Incarceration, and they have a traveling exhibit that goes around, so that one came to mind when you were asking. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the mobile education lab, because that's something we've thought about doing is what would like a pop-up writing experience look like. So I'd love to hear more about the mobile education lab.
The mobile education, first we started it at a church, which we still do it. And we did have the help with the probation and parole departments who brought their parolees as part of, I guess, what they have to do when they first get out. And we had like 11 to 15 that we enrolled that day. But the next one we did, we had like only 3 people come because that wasn't part of the parole. We just did it on our own. And then we did a third one where nobody showed up because we found out a lot of people are in those programs. The transitional housing, they're just getting out of prison, they go halfway houses. So that's when we decided maybe we need to go into the programs, because a lot of people, when they get their Saturday pass, they ain't gonna wanna go to a program or go to a education lab. They wanna visit their family. So that's why we decided to connect with them inside the program. And that seems to be more successful because they're there and and that's also the time when they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next after they get out of prison. When they get out to a program, that's where they decide, what am I going to do with my life now? And I guess to me, I feel that's the proper time to get them before when they do get out and go do something else that especially go in the wrong way, in the wrong direction. So it's important to get them right when they get out of prison. Beyond the bars? Beyond the bars. Yes, it's from Columbia University. It's at Columbia University. That's where we had our the conference there at the beginning of March. You have it every year in the beginning of March. And every year is a different theme. It just so happened this last theme was for women.
Yeah.
About the women who are formerly incarcerated, the stigmatization that they go through, the difference that they go through, and how men are incarcerated, especially as being mothers. So we went and presented in that conference. Last year was about closing prisons, about how is it best, should we do more rehabilitation instead of sentencing in prison. That was a theme last year. So every year is a different theme. And they have California's brought one to UCLA as like the chapter of them, but they collaborate with each other. That's how we got involved, because of the chapter that's in California.
I'm sorry. Is it a student organization?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is
Student-led.
Yes. Isn't it?
Yeah, I believe at Columbia is through their social work department, and then they have fellows that are formerly incarcerated that help give input and help them plan the conference as well.
I guess I have for Speak Out. Does your organization have to go through some background check to be able to participate in and provide the programs within the prison? How often?
Yes. So it depends on the site, what level of scrutiny people are held to. But earlier today, someone was asking about people being able to mentor. I think that was a question asked of some of the women who joined us via video. Could you go back in and mentor? And it's a common impulse for people who are leaving Speak Out to want to come back in. They can't come back in county rule, maybe a state rule, for 3 years. So even if they leave before our final reading, so our celebration, our publication launch, they're not allowed to come back in for that celebration as a free person. I know that's not quite what you're asking. I think what you're asking is about the facilitators and how they're vetted. And so they are, there is a background check run. I believe there's a little bit more paperwork for the folks who are working with our youth sites. Probably a little less paperwork for people who are working in community corrections. Is that right, Shelby? A little less. And for the jail, they have to fill out a volunteer application. And they have to go through our training, which is, we have a 3-hour initial orientation. They meet with either myself or our associate director to make sure they're a good fit. And then we have ongoing trainings that people participate in as well. And then they're mentored by people like the 3 folks sitting here who are the interns, who have a bit more responsibility than volunteers, who might participate just on a weekly basis. Folks who are interns are also getting credit. They're, if they choose, they are doing some reading. So we do have a much more structured program for our interns so that they can be mentors if folks who then want to come in.
Okay. I am a first-year DTA, and I'm wanting to be a teacher. What can I do in a classroom to best support a student who is formerly incarcerated? So I guess I should say I was asking this for the Rising Scholars. So.
I'll try to answer this one. Well, me is going to my professor, let him know who I am, and a lot of them, the professors, At first I used to think, oh, they're going to have some kind of a stigma towards me because of being formerly incarcerated. But most of what I found are very supportive. And like I said, they like to see that somebody's moving forward, and I'm sure you do too. And I guess that shows, I don't know the word for it you say, it's just being supportive, but showing that people can change. There are positives from being formerly incarcerated. It doesn't always have to be negative. I just letting them know. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll say maybe like during the semester, one of, not even like your assignment, but I think I've always been choosy about which professors like I've come out and told that I've been formerly incarcerated. And for me, part of it is like at some point during that class, they've said something that made me feel like they're like an ally to me. So if you can incorporate that some way during the semester into your thing, I think it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable to be able to come out.
So for Speak Out, have other universities asked you if they could duplicate your program? Have you put the information or made it available to anyone, in a proactive way? Have you gone to other organizations or universities to recommend this? It seems like such a valuable offering.
We've written about it quite a bit. So we've published, we tried to put out one piece a year that's co-authored. Usually it's myself and someone who's interested. So Shelby and I are working right now on a piece that is going to focus on self-care and facilitators' experiences, teaching, either writing classes or leading writing workshops. So that's one way that we've done that across disciplines. So we've published in books on volunteerism inside prisons within our home discipline of English studies or my home discipline of literacy and rhetorical studies. We also are part of a group of folks who teach writing inside. And so we just had our annual conference last year, and we always meet with a pre-conference workshop. So there are probably, 50 or 60 people who are part of that group who regularly talk about it. So happy to share that information with anyone who's interested.
Hi, I noticed in your Speak Out booklet here that there is artwork. And I was wondering if that is an augmentation to your program or if this is just freelance stuff that they bring and share. Or I was also thinking about people who are incarcerated who may not be able to read and who can't participate in the writing program. Is there anything with art to help outreach?
So in terms of most of the art that's in the journals, it's stuff that people have done outside of the workshops that they then bring in. There's a writer in the workshop that I'm facilitating now who passed around a piece that he had drawn that was inspired by one of the pieces that he'd written in Speak Out. And so there are sometimes relationships there, but I think for the most part, those pieces do come from other places. That said, I know there's another intern who has seen in one of the youth facilities that when students don't feel comfortable reading or writing, they will draw during the workshops and still have that avenue for channeling their ideas when they aren't able to or don't feel comfortable writing.
Can't read or write.
Are there other questions for the panelists?
The second question you asked was about literacy levels. So what happens to folks who are not comfortable reading or writing? And I wasn't sure if it was one of these folks or one of our other team members, but someone was just telling me last week about having two folks sitting in the workshop, and things get noisy sometimes they're quiet, usually they're not, usually it's kind of noisy. And so she wasn't sure what was happening with two writers, and it turned out that one of the writers was not able to write. And so the other was translating and actually transcribing the work. And so we've had that come up definitely across the years. We've also had folks who are not native speakers of English or who don't feel comfortable writing in English. And so we've had people who translate as well.
I think, Manton, you touched on the fact that there's some extremely sensitive topics that the writers are sharing about in these workshops. I'm just wondering what sort of consideration you as facilitators give to those kind of traumatic stories that are being shared and that may be traumatic for other prisoners to relive or hear about, or as facilitators for you to encounter.
Yeah, so certain workshops definitely, one person will share something that will trigger another person. I've not had any negative experience with that. I feel that the group dynamic really kicks in that moment. The writers console each other. That's what I find most always happens, is that they will say something that was heavy and hard to hear, and the other guys will jump in and just kind of console that person.
One of the considerations that I would say that we do make, and we do try to be intentional about the prompts that we bring in, is to make sure that we're not bringing in things that will we're not coming in and saying, please write about your trauma. We're providing prompts that are open-ended so that a lot of people do go there kind of automatically. Those are the things that they feel most compelled to write. But other people can step back and write about something that feels perhaps less intense or less personal. And so giving some of that leeway, I think, is helpful. But I think you're right that it is complicated when it does come up. There's only a certain extent to which we can control the emotional reactions that someone might have to a piece that we bring in, a piece that gets read in workshop, a piece that someone writes that might even surprise themselves. And I think Manton makes a good point that a lot of the time the group will support each other. But I think it's definitely a time when we as facilitators and then the writers themselves often take to this too, is a lot of validating that it must have been really scary to write that or to share that it must have taken a lot of courage to go there. And my sense from experiencing that is that makes people feel like their stories belong there and that they'll receive support for them when they do share them.
And knowing that we do have a responsibility to the institution we're working with to report if we think someone is in harm's way. And we have done that in the past. If we're particularly concerned about someone, we're lucky to have a pretty good relationship with all of our sites. And so if we, I think, generally feel comfortable telling our volunteer coordinator, that this particular writer might need some extra care as we, leave the facility. And then there's also the question of what happens when you accumulate semester after semester of trauma narratives. And so we try to attend to that too, in talking with facilitators about what it means to do this work and when you might need to take a break and what other strategies are out there for grappling with, self-care gets thrown around a lot, but we try to take care of the folks who we're training to do this work as well.
Anyone else? Well then, let's thank our panel.